Hey, welcome to today's show. My name is Jeff Harrison, and you are here with Mortgage Minute. It kind of reminds me of like being in a three-ring circus, except one person over here is juggling knives, the other person is playing Russian roulette, and the other person, well, they're actually juggling chainsaws. And I can't wait to get our host on here, who is he's the expert in the lending industry, and he's going to talk about this. There's a lot that's going on. Oh, wait a minute. There's actually a fourth ring, and it is a game of chicken. I can't wait till Art gets a chance to talk about this. Let's bring Art on. Art is the master of the big tent, and Art, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm
Yeah,
not
it's
sure
going to
I'm
be a great show
interested in
today. I
any of
can't
those
wait to
games you
hear
mentioned.
it. Like that never happens in our world, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. So,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to play any of those games, other than the fact that the game of chicken, I think, is pretty relevant in the markets right now. So that's something we can certainly touch on.
Well, I'm going to, just before I get out here, I'm just going to remind people, whether you're watching this live or you're coming in afterwards and checking it out, maybe you're on the email list and you're getting a piece of this, that you have questions for Art, please put them in the comments. I'll be behind the scenes monitoring that. And if it's afterwards, Art will catch up with those and give you an answer. And in many cases, he might address it right here on the next show. So I'll be darting out of here, and Art, I'll be running the slides for you. So when you're ready, just let me know. Let's have a great show.
Okay, Jeff. Yeah, let's fire away. Well, hello, everyone, to this week's Mortgage Minute. It's been quite the week, and so I want to get right into that. As we always do with the Mortgage Minute, the first thing I want to do is kind of check in with all of you and let you know where mortgage rates are. So in terms of the mortgage update, of course, I always suggest go to our website. We've got a rate grid right on the homepage, and if you've been looking at that from week to week, you'll notice a little bit of a change. I've been saying for weeks that we've been pretty well into the fives, mid to high fives on mortgage rates. That's unfortunately no longer the case. We're definitely, now into the sixes, as you can see from this rate grid. All conforming FHA, VA loan types are now, 6+, even up to the mid sixes. So part of the reason for that is, as I always mention, if you look at the 10-year Treasury bond, if we look at a 5-year chart, as Jeff just pulled up here, you can see the trend since last Friday. The yield has been creeping up all this week. And of course, today finishing up right around 3.82. So as I've said many times, there is a correlation between the 10-year Treasury bond and the direction of mortgage rates. So what's going on here? Why has this yield, the bond yields and mortgage yields, been trending up higher the last couple of weeks, actually? Well, there's a couple of reasons. And probably the predominant reason is the markets are very jittery about the debt ceiling negotiations. If you've been paying attention to the news, and of course, as we've talked about before, always beware of the headlines. The media does a great job of selling gloom and doom, and there's been a lot of that this week in the financial news. Lots of headlines about the calamities that will come if the debt ceiling negotiations aren't resolved and an agreement reached. The big fear is that the U.S. could default, and of course, all kinds of bad things will happen, which we'll get into in a minute. A secondary factor is there is sort of a change in the bets on what the Fed's going to do at next month's meeting. After the last meeting, they raised 0.25% in the Fed funds rate. There seemed to be some indications the Fed was going to pause. Now that seems to be changing. A couple of the Fed governors recently made public comments about the fact that they're not interested in stopping the trend of raising the Fed funds rate until inflation's closer to 2%. Now it's trending lower, but inflation's still closer to 4 to 5%. So there's a kind of an increased probability, or increased odds, now up to about a 40% chance that the Fed may raise the Fed funds rate again next week or at the next month's meeting. So we'll see how that plays out. I think that's a secondary factor. It's all about the debt ceiling negotiations. And once an agreement's reached, I'm going to predict that rates will moderate and settle down. But in that regard, one of our viewers last week contacted me and asked if I could comment on an article that just came out recently, earlier this week, on Realtor.com. And of course, this is an example of the media news story that, of course, was suggesting some pretty significant derogatory things that would happen. In fact, the title of the article was "Chaos: Will a U.S. Default Eviscerate the Housing Market?" And so I want to, my viewer asked me to talk about this article a little bit. I read it. There's a few things I want to point out. Number one, I will continue to say there is the slimmest of odds that the U.S. will default. But of course, the point of this article was, well, what if it does? What happens? What are the implications? What are the effects going to be on the economy, on mortgage rates, and so forth? Well, the primary issue with a potential U.S. default is that the U.S. Financial reputation is damaged by the failure to pay their debts. And of course, if we default, if the government defaults, then paying the government's debts could fall into question. So that definitely spooks the markets, and that's what's been going on all week. And consider this, Treasury bonds have been considered basically risk-free investments, a risk-free safe haven. To a secondary degree, certain mortgage-backed bonds like Ginnie Mae bonds, where they're backed by FHA and VA mortgages, USDA mortgages, or even MBS, mortgage-backed securities that are issued by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Though those are not technically government agencies, they are still considered a pretty safe haven compared to other, non-governmental bonds, corporate bonds, et cetera. So when you have a situation where Treasury bonds, which have been considered risk-free, that would be affected by a default, because then at that point, there would be some question in the marketplace about the U.S. government's ability to pay out on Treasury bonds if we are in a default status. And so because Treasury bonds now appear to be carrying some risk because of all the doom and gloom news, that's what's causing bond yields to creep up higher and higher. And so that's what we're seeing when you look at that 10-year bond chart. Now, other things will happen related to the economy. Of course, if the default occurs, FHA, VA loans could essentially be interrupted in terms of availability. There would be a huge contraction of outlays in such things as Social Security, housing allowances for low-income renters, and so forth. But here's an interesting thing: home values. While home values, if we have a default, would be expected to fall a bit, probably not by much. Why? Because actually a U.S. default, would probably reduce the number of homes for sale on the market, both because rates would go up, as well as the fact that home buyer or homeowners may be less willing to put their home on the market because of financial uncertainty. So even though home values might fall a little bit, that worsening would be muted by the fact that inventory would get even tighter, which would help prop up home value. So in that regard, I would want everyone to know I continue to not see any kind of significant collapse in home values anytime soon. In fact, we may have a little bit of a dip as we've been experiencing, but then I think home values are going to continue to move higher and have a higher upward trend. So the point here is that if the default occurs, then U.S. Treasuries, of course, now are considered a risky investment. And so the yield demanded by investors is going to be much higher because they're going to demand a higher return because of the default situation. So that's really the core thing to worry about. Again, I will continue to suggest I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, for our viewers, I would suggest maybe look up an article in Fortune magazine that just came out yesterday. It was referencing Jeremy Siegel, who's a professor of finance at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a well-known, market forecaster, has a pretty good record. And if you pull up that article, he indicates very strongly he sees a zero chance of a U.S. default. So I would tend to agree with that. So while this week and maybe going into next week, we're going to continue to see a lot of financial volatility, I'm still going to put my money on the fact that this will blow over. There will be an agreement reached. There won't be a default, and then mortgage rates should subside after that. So hopefully I'm right. We'll see soon. All this is supposed to shake out sometime between now and next week, June 1st. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I've got sort of a clever title to this particular segment, but it's based on something that I kind of dealt with actually last weekend when I was contacted to issue a pre-approval for a prospective home buyer who was looking to purchase a condominium. And when I was contacted about this pre-qual, I was told that the buyer was looking to make an offer on a condominium that was listed at $650,000, but the home buyer and their agent had advised me that their intent was to offer $630,000. So of course, as I put here, friends don't let friends submit an offer below list price. So what do I mean by that? Well, again, the example being property was listed at $650,000. Buyer and their agent contact me, want a pre-approval letter, but tell me they're going to offer $630,000. I softly suggested, hey, wait a minute. There are other options that you might want to consider, such as maybe offer full price and then get that $20,000 concession from the seller in another way. So the agent listened to me on that and then asked, well, what about if we offer the full list price and then ask for a 3% seller credit, which happened to total $19,500 on that purchase price? I replied, that would be great. And so then what I did is I prepared some numbers, a worksheet, where I demonstrated that with that kind of seller credit, which again would cost the same amount in terms of net proceeds to the seller as just accepting the lower offer of $630,000 over the list price of $650,000, that with that credit, I could use that to do a combination of things. One, buy down the rate significantly, in fact, by about 1%, as well as still have money left over to cover, a good portion of the borrower's closing costs. And in fact, the net result, when I sent the numbers to the agent and her buyer, the borrower, what I was able to demonstrate is that by using a $650,000 offer, not $630,000, and then get the seller to agree to a 3% credit, we would be able to lower the borrower's projected monthly housing expense by $400 a month. And we'd be able to reduce the borrower's cash to close by almost $4,000 a month. Now, every market's different. There are parts of both my local market here, Orange County, LA, San Diego, up into LA, LA County, up Northern California. Some markets are still experiencing tight inventory to the point where they are still getting multiple offers and some deals going over list price. But there's other markets. Part of what's going on out here, in particular with condos, is those do seem to be longer as to days on market, taking longer to sell. And there's a little bit more of an instance where some buyers are taking advantage of what they think they have leverage for and looking to offer lower prices than what is listed. So my advice is, if you're a borrower or if you're an agent, if you're working together on a property and you're in a market where you think you have an opportunity to, kind of be aggressive and offer something below list, before doing that, check with us, check with your own lender if you have one already. Ask them what that concession that would have occurred with your lower list price offer, if you took those dollars and applied it toward the financing, what kind of outcome would be possible. I would urge you to do that, again, in any market where you think you have an opportunity to offer below list. Figure out a way to use those dollars to help the borrower with their financing. I think you're going to find it's going to be a very big help, both in terms of monthly payment as well as cash to close. And again, if you have one you're working on, want to get some numbers, we can prepare those for you very quickly so that it doesn't hold up your offer. All right, so that's that. And of course, what I want to point out too with that is that, again, it's going to vary depending on which market you're in. Now, the next one is something that just also came up here about a week or so ago. I was talking to a homeowner, senior homeowner, who was thinking about a reverse mortgage, but ultimately was sort of leaning against not doing that, which I thought was a little bit surprising because they did want to tap into their equity to pull some cash out for some specific purposes. And so instead, they brought up the idea of doing a HELOC. And so what that led me to realize is that, some senior homeowners are not maybe fully aware of the fact that a reverse mortgage does provide an option to get a line of credit. In fact, when you look at the title of this screen, you can see HELOC versus RMLOC. What's a RMLOC? Well, RMLOC is reverse mortgage line of credit. And I think in that regard, it's important, if you're a senior homeowner, you've been mulling over a reverse mortgage, but maybe you decide you don't want to do that. Maybe you've got a modest first mortgage, and you do want to tap in your equity, and you think that maybe HELOC's a better way to go. I think there's some important factors that you want to take into account. So on this page, what we're going to show you some specific difference between getting a HELOC or getting a reverse mortgage, where you can access the funds available to you through a line of credit in the reverse mortgage. So the first thing, of course, is a HELOC. There's no age restriction, so you can get one no matter how old you are, how young you are, of course, assuming you're an adult. A reverse mortgage, of course, you do have to be 62 years of age. Now, as to home ownership and amount of equity with a HELOC, you need to have, it says 15 to 20% equity. Actually, even as little as 10% equity, it's possible, or another way to put it is a HELOC can go up to 90% loan to value when combined with your first. Now, with a reverse mortgage line of credit, yeah, you do have to have a substantial amount of equity, usually 50% or more. That's just fundamental to getting reverse mortgage anyway. Credit scores. Most HELOCs, you're going to have a credit score of at least 650. But with a reverse mortgage, remember, there is no credit score minimum required. So that's an important feature to keep in mind if you're mulling over a HELOC versus getting a reverse mortgage. Now, this next one is very important, and it came up way back in the Great Recession of 2008, and that is cancellation or freezing of a line of credit account. Now, when you have a HELOC, buried in the loan terms, the lender does have the ability to freeze your account or to cancel it outright if they have determined that property values are falling and their security interest in your property is at more risk because of reduced equity. That happened a lot after the 2008 recession. A lot of homeowners who had HELOCs found out kind of the hard way that their HELOC had been closed from being able to take additional advances or had been canceled out altogether. Well, with a reverse mortgage, that cannot happen. That HELOC, that line of credit, actually, that reverse mortgage line of credit remains in place. It cannot and will not be frozen under any scenarios. Now, the other thing about a HELOC, of course, is you have to make monthly payments. It's a traditional forward mortgage. When you've got a line of credit that's part of your reverse mortgage, of course, there's no monthly payments on that loan at all. The other thing that's an important feature that a lot of folks don't realize is, of course, a HELOC doesn't grow over time. When you get your line amount, that's your line amount, and it's not going to change. It's not going to go up. Not true with the line of credit obtained through a reverse mortgage. The line of credit in a HELOC does grow over time. It grows basically at 4% a year. So that's important. So as the years go by, that HELOC that the senior homeowner has access to does grow. And that's an important feature to the extent that they need to access more money after they initially access what they needed to get. Now, in terms of the borrower's payment history on any existing mortgages, et cetera, that is going to be taken into account on a HELOC. It is not a factor when you're getting a reverse mortgage and the line of credit. And then the last thing, annual fees. A HELOC is almost always going to have an annual fee, kind of like a credit card, $75 to $99 a year. Now, with a reverse mortgage line of credit, there's no annual fee, but of course, keep in mind, there is upfront as well as ongoing mortgage insurance premiums that, again, you don't pay out of pocket, but the annual mortgage insurance premiums accrue to the loan balance, but otherwise you don't have to actually directly pay. They're just paid at the time the loan's paid off later. So I wanted to bring this up only because, again, with this particular interview with the senior homeowner who was mulling over a HELOC, once I pointed out some of these distinct features between a HELOC and a reverse mortgage line of credit, he's now rethinking going with the HELOC and probably will do the reverse mortgage now that he realizes how the line of credit in the reverse mortgage is really more advantageous for the reasons I just showed. So keep that in mind, something to know, to be aware of if you or someone you know is a senior homeowner and they're not quite sure they want to do a reverse mortgage and thinking a HELOC's a better way to go. Rethink that, be happy to talk to them and go into that in more detail. And of course, also don't remember, I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, we do have a reverse mortgage second mortgage program called the Home Safe Second. Remember, that's still an option too, where If you don't have a reverse mortgage now, you have a modest first mortgage that you can comfortably handle. You want to access your cash, but maybe you don't want the HELOC, have a monthly payment. Once you tap into that cash, the Home Safe Second is a great alternative for a senior homeowner to get that cash and still not have a monthly payment, even though it's a second mortgage. So from that, we'll go to actually our last week's closing question. If you remember, what I had left you with last week at the end of our episode was a question that was, can a borrower who is relocating to a new city because of a job offer be able to close on the purchase of a home before the job actually starts? And I put this question into our closing of the episode last week because I'm actually handling a transaction where this is involved. And guess what? Of course, you might imagine the answer is yes. This is possible. Now, there are some criteria, so let me go over those real quick. First thing to note is in this kind of scenario, and in the case I'm handling right now, it's a borrower who's going to stay with their employer, but moving from Northern California to Southern California into the desert area here, and just going to be working in a different county. So what's first thing to note is the new job has to start no later than 90 days after the note date when the loan is made. So in other words, if we're going to close the loan now, the new job has to be able to start within 90 days after the time the closing docs are drawn. And then in order to make this work, the borrower has to be able to present in their loan file a future employment offer or contract that's going to stipulate the details of their new job and the criteria for it. It's going to reflect the terms of employment, in other words, what their job title is, what their start date is, and of course, most importantly, what their compensation arrangement's going to be. It's got to be an employment offer that's non-contingent. It can't be a conditional job offer. It's got to be a condition-free, non-contingent job offer in order to establish the certainty of this future job and the income stream that's going to be coming from that in order to use that for determining a debt ratio. Now, this type of approach has limited applicability. We can only do this on a transaction where the borrower is purchasing a home as their primary residence. It has to be a one-unit property. So if they're buying a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, that's not allowed. It's got to be a one-unit property, either single-family home or a condo. They cannot be employed by a family member or an interested party in the transaction, such as one of the real estate agents, that kind of thing. So they cannot be employed by a family member. And here's what's most important. You are qualified based on fixed base income only. Now, this is an important distinction. What that means essentially is that the future job that's going to be relied upon, your compensation has to be salary, a fixed salary, which is clearly stipulated in the employment offer document, or it can be hourly, but we have to establish that the hourly rate is going to be paid on a required 40-hour work week. So that does fall under fixed base income definition. So salary or hourly with a guaranteed or required 40-hour minimum per week. So fixed base income does not mean we can use commission, can't use bonus, can't use overtime. So it's important, therefore, anyone or if you're in a situation where you might be moving to a new market, you want to figure out how to get that home purchase done first, even before the new job starts. It is possible to get the loan, believe it or not, but you have to meet this criteria in order to successfully close on the loan and on the home before the new job actually starts. And you might be thinking, does this mean we're going to be able to close that loan without even getting a pay stub to show that the borrower's received the first pay stub? And the answer is yes. Under this criteria, we can close the loan and don't have to get that pay stub or wait for that pay stub before doing so. So this is a neat little feature that can help in a lot of situations, particularly anybody moving to a new market, maybe through a job transfer and so forth, which, by the way, this doesn't mean that in making the change from one location and trying to close on a purchase in a new location before the new job starts. It doesn't have to be with the same employer. It can be with a new employer, preferably in the same line of work. But again, the same criteria does apply, including what the employment contract has to look like. So with that, I want to go ahead and finish up with today's closing question. And of course, we've got Memorial Day coming up. Very important holiday as we remember everyone, all of our service people who have protected the country, and of course those who have fallen in doing so. It's a holiday weekend, but hopefully we'll keep veterans past and present in our thoughts. And so with that in mind, I wanted to leave you a closing question regarding VA loans. And here's the question: what is the maximum debt ratio a veteran borrower who has applied for a VA loan must meet to ensure a loan approval? Now, you may know, and in future episodes, I may have commented on the fact, conventional conforming loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, sort of the target debt ratio max 43. Some cases you can go up to 50. FHA loans, standard debt ratios are typically 29-41, but quite often, almost routinely, we can go higher on debt ratio. I've done many transactions where the total debt ratio on an FHA loan can be as high as 55 to 57%, again, depending on the scenario. But what is it for VA? Well, I think you're going to find the answer to that is a pretty interesting answer. And so just keep that in mind. And next week, we'll give you the answer and it'll be on the house. So with that, Jeff, back to you.
Wow, Art, you did that really well. Nobody got hurt. Everybody caught everything. That was really good. It just reminds me a little bit when you start talking about this defaulting on a debt scenario. It kind of reminds me of the Y2K scare. Is that too much of a reach?
I don't think so. The U.S. government has never really outright defaulted. We had things got kind of ugly in 2011, but I think from everything I've read, everything I've observed, and over the years when we've faced this before, there's always this sort of period of turmoil, and as our viewers article that he sent me to comment on, the chaos involved with these kind of negotiations. But they always seem to ultimately work itself out. But it very often can go right up to like the 11th hour. As we started the show, it's a game of chicken right now with, the Republicans and the Democrats, and, they're lobbying for, what they want in the agreement, what they don't want. And but I continue to believe, and I think history will show, it does show, that the risk of a default, the likelihood of default, is virtually nil. But the frustrating part, particularly anybody involved in the real estate and home buying markets right now, is it can have some consequences in terms of real time right now, as we showed earlier, with rates trending upward. So for some folks, it could be a timing issue where they got to make some decisions, maybe get ready to close or maybe lock a rate. So you really got some challenges there as to decide what to do in the midst of all this chaos. But I think we're going to be fine. I don't see it happening. And so it's just a question of how many more days of this chaos do we have to deal with before there's some clarity, there's now an agreement in place, and things should start to settle down. I would expect the stock market to rally pretty good. I would expect bond yields to rally and start to drop pretty significantly if we get an agreement. And frankly, the sooner the better.
Just to reiterate, you said the reason we're seeing this steady increase in the 10-year Treasury is purely because of this uncertainty with this debt ceiling, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. As I mentioned, there's a secondary factor where there's a little bit of an increase in the betting, if you will, the probability that the Fed may raise the Fed funds rate again another 0.25% or more next month. I think that's sort of a secondary factor, but definitely I think the primary issue that's causing the disruption in the bond market and the increase in yields is the debt ceiling negotiations. And every day that goes by with more and more headlines that are doom and gloom and disasters imminent, I think that doesn't help. There is a psychological factor in the bond market. And of course, the other thing too, though, in particular as to today, as we creep closer to that June 1st deadline, if you will, the rating agencies, for example, Fitch announced this morning that they are putting the U.S. Debt rating, which is currently AAA rating, again, virtually risk-free. They have now put that in a watch status, and there's no surprise, therefore, that the 10-year bond yield, which was yesterday hovering around 372 to 374, today, of course, is over 380. I think there's a direct correlation there with the rating agencies putting the U.S. Debt rating status on watch. I think there's a direct correlation there. So again, think of it this way: we get the debt ceiling agreement. The worst is over. Probably the first thing that's going to happen is that watch status will be retracted, and that will be a factor as to why the bond yields, I think, will start to settle down.
So that watch status, once this is all set, you think that's going to come off rather rapidly?
I think so. Yeah. They're really. I mean, I can't see a scenario where they would leave that in place unless, in some fashion, the agreement that's reached is somehow viewed as not restoring the credit worthiness of the government. So I suppose that's possible, but my sense of it is that's probably not going to happen. I think the agreement, whatever the agreement is, once reached, should be good enough that there would not be a need to maintain that watch status much longer than June 1st, if at all. So.
Fantastic. Well, Art, as always, thank you so much for all the information. And if you're catching us live or in a recorded situation, you can see why now you want to have someone like Art in your corner when you have questions about your mortgage. I mean, he shared today just two scenarios where you can leverage what you're doing differently and save you $400 a month in actual costs, and then reduce your closing costs by as much as $4,000 based on this one scenario. Just the creativity, knowing of 42 plus years of being in the industry that not all answers are a straight line, I guess I should say. Is that correct?
They're not all a straight line, but they're all on the house.
Perfect. Hey, if you need to get a hold of Art, make sure you go to MortgageWorks. Art can be reached on the phone at 760-883-5700, or as we like to say, on his red bat phone at 714-612-9035. And of course, the website is nwloan.com. You can go there and check out the rates anytime. And if you feel the need to reach out to Art via email, it's art@mwloan.com. And as I say, every Thursday, he's here providing information and resource for those people who are, anything from, hey, first-time home buyers to someone that's a senior citizen thinking, hey, what do I do with all this equity in my home? How about a reverse mortgage line of credit? What a great idea. One thing I noticed on that real quickly before I let you go is, you said a regular line of credit, a HELOC, and a RM lock. One is backed by the government. The other one is not.
That's correct. I mean, again, one of the things that I think a lot of folks don't realize is the standard or the core reverse mortgage product in this country, in the U.S., is an FHA product. It's administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And the reason it has mortgage insurance on it, which some people complain about because they deem it to be too expensive, but it plays an important role because that's essentially what provides kind of that government guarantee, if you will, because remember that a reverse mortgage is a non-recourse loan. So the homeowner and their family are protected so that eventually, when the homeowner passes on and that reverse mortgage has to be paid off, if the home value has fallen to the point where at that time the balance owed is more than the home is worth, the family, those who inherited the property from the borrower, are not responsible and don't have to pay the deficiency balance. The lender instead submits a claim to HUD to get reimbursed for that deficiency balance. So there's no further expenditure by the family. So that's an important feature that protects the homeowner and their family. And that's the reason why the reverse mortgage, which includes that line of credit option, doesn't have any payments at all. So.
It's fantastic. Well, as he says, this is MortgageWorks, where they have the answer and it's answers, and they're on the house. And Art's information is there. Art, until next week, hey, have a great weekend. Thank you so much for providing so much information and your time. We really appreciate it. Make sure to share this with a friend, family, neighbor, or maybe your best customer, as Art would say. If you have any questions or comments, please make sure to put them in the comment section, and Art will address them between now and next week. Thank you so much, Art.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and stay tuned till next week when we'll have more answers and they'll be on the house. Thanks.